Hello and welcome everyone to our second session of our Procura Plus webinar series on socially responsible ICT procurement. I'm very happy today that you are here, and today we have two of our five case studies of good practice within the MakeICTFair Project. And my name is Vera Noppenberger. I'm your moderator for today. And I'm a junior officer. I work for ICLEI, Local Governance for Sustainability. Before we jump in, I would like to give you a brief introduction into GoToWebinar for those of you who are not familiar with it yet. So you're muted right now, the audience is muted, but you can ask questions anytime with the button raise your hand. So you can just click on here, or you can type in your question in the question section below, and then I will hand it over to the speaker. I would also like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded, and you will receive the recording afterwards. We also do so to put it on our website afterwards, so people who didn't have the chance today can still watch it later. So yeah, here are the speakers for today. Also, again, my colleague Paula Land, she's a Sustainability and Procurement Officer for ICLEI. And then we have Michael McLaurin. He's a head of category information services from APUC Scotland. And then we have Kathleen McCaughey. She's a manager sustainable supply chains, and she's working for the region Stockholm. But before I hand over to my colleague, I would like to give you a brief introduction into the project. So MakeICTFair aims to reform manufacturing and manual supply chains through policy, finance, and public procurement. It's a 3-year EU project, and it started in 2017, so it's coming to an end. And yeah, the project aims to pilot advanced socially responsible public procurement of ICT products and services, and that's why we have those 5 case studies of good practice. We have Barcelona, Haarlem, Stavanger, APUC Scotland, and Stockholm, and they are all published now. So you can have a look into our resource center if you would like. Here's the link. I can also put it in the chat after my presentation. That's where you can find them all. And for those of you who attended to the first session already in November, you got the chance to listen to 3 speakers from Barcelona, Haarlem, and Stavanger. They talked about steps towards integrating social criteria in ICT procurement tenders. And today, I already gave you a hint with our speakers. We have APUC Scotland and Stockholm, and they will talk about how to keep those social criteria alive through contact management. So yeah, I will hand over to my colleague Paula Land in a few minutes. She will give you an introduction into the Procura Plus webinar, not webinar, Procura Plus network, excuse me. And then Michael will introduce you to APUC Scotland, and we'll talk about contact clauses, key performance indicators. And Kathleen will present the region Stockholm, and she will share lessons learned on how to keep social criteria alive. And afterwards, and also after the first presentation, you have time for questions. And depending on how many questions we have, it will end around 11:30. And now I hand over to my colleague, Paula. You should be
thank you, now. Vera. I will share my screen. Awesome. All right. Okay. Thank you, Vera, for the introduction. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, but you can also make it full screen.
I think now it's full screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
that didn't work last time, and I was presenting the whole presentation thing. I think this looks better. Yeah, thanks a lot, Vera, for the introduction. My name is Paula. I'm a colleague of Vera at ICLEI, And I'm here to briefly present the Procura Plus network. Since this webinar series is also being hosted under the umbrella of the Procura Plus webinar series, I just want to give a brief introduction about the Procura Plus European Sustainable Procurement Network, which is an initiative of ICLE. And the two case studies that we're hearing today are actually both coming from, not from the city of Stockholm, but APUC Scotland is also a Procura Plus participant. And the other three case studies were also coming from Procura Plus participants. So just a brief overview into the Procura Plus network. The network has the goal of connecting public procurers across Europe to work together, exchange and connect and act on sustainable innovation procurement. The goal is also to bring together combined knowledge of all these public procurers to provide advice, support, and publicity to any public authority that wants to implement sustainable and innovation procurement. And what is also key for us in the network is to enable our participants to act on sustainable procurement and to actually implement these topics that our participants are exchanging on. So, that was my computer making a loud noise. So about the Procura Plus network, it's already existed for 16 years. There are currently 16 countries part of the network, 46 participants. And with this, we like to say we represent a population of 63 million in Europe. Here you can see the spread of the participants from all across Europe. Even Reykjavik and Iceland is a participant in the network. So what do we do within the Procura Plus network? We like to bring people together through different activities. Here you can see a photograph from our last Procura Plus seminar, which took place in 2018. Unfortunately, this picture in these times would probably be replaced by a frame of little squares of people talking to each other. But hopefully these kinds of images will come back in the future again. What's also important is that we actually enable participants to work together to really work on the issues and questions that they have in relation to sustainable and innovation procurement. To do this, we have a series of events that we regularly organize. So for example, Procura Plus seminars, the image that I just showed you, those provide an opportunity for face-to-face exchange on the topic. And this is where all Procura Plus network participants regularly meet. We also organize webinars like this one, as well as Procura Plus conferences. This is a larger event, one of the biggest sustainable procurement dedicated events in Europe. And this is taking place every 3 to 4 years. Of course, at the moment, we're a bit on hiatus with these events, especially in-person ones. We also like to share new opportunities for joining funded projects with our participants to enable them to implement the kinds of sustainable procurement projects that they want to pursue. Another initiative that we do every year is the Procura Plus Awards. In 2020, the city of Haarlem won the Sustainable Procurement of the Year award. There's more great procurements that won the awards in 2020. Those you can find on our website. A very interesting range of different approaches. We're covering sustainable procurement, innovation procurement, procurement of ICT as well, and also bigger procurement initiatives. We will be launching the Procura Plus Awards 2021, so if you have a great initiative that you would like to apply with, you need to keep your eyes peeled on our communication channels. Aside from this, there's several other activities that are a key part of the Procura Plus network. These are Procura Plus interest groups, groups which we form around a specific topic of interest to work together over an extended period of time, regularly meeting online or offline, and really working together on this. Currently, we have an interest group on circular procurement, which is active and regularly meeting. We also like to organize city twinning programs involving 2 or more Procura Plus participants visiting each other and working in partnership to support each other in implementing specific activities. We like to share advice and guidance, so we publish the Procura Plus update. This is a newsletter that's coming out 3 times a year. And we have also authored the Procura Plus manual, which is a guide to implementing sustainable public procurement. We have global sister networks. This is a global initiative, so there's also the Procura Plus Africa network, as well as the Procura Plus East Asia network. We're affiliated with a range of other international networks, such as the UN Environment Programme with their One Planet network, and for example, the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat, to be able to be connected to these other initiatives. Here I have 2 slides introducing examples from the Procura Plus cities, leading by example, good practices, for example, from the Barcelona City Council. But actually, I think I would like to give the word back to our speakers that we have today, because they will be sharing good practice with us. And I think this is what we should be focusing on today. But if you have any questions or would like to learn more about the Procura Plus network, please just drop us an email or visit the website procuraplus.org. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Vera.
Thank you very much, Paula, for this introduction. I will now change the presenter to Michael. I will give you the floor.
Thank you. Okay. Can you see my screen okay, Vera?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, good. Okay, so thanks for inviting me to present to you today. My name is Michael McLaughlin. I head up the information service category at APUC, where we put in place contracts for the universities and colleges in Scotland. And the information services category covers ICT hardware, and it covers software and library contracts. So today I'm going to talk to you about a pilot project that we undertook as part of the MakeICTFair Project to test out some approaches to procurement approaches to try to embed sustainability into our contracts. So today I'll give you an overview of the project, and my focus is really going to be on contract management, but I'll just introduce the project at the start of the presentation, and then talk about what we managed to achieve and how we have gone about the contract management process, and I'll finish off with how that's changed recently with the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, just an introduction to who we are. So as APUC Limited, it's a procurement consortium owned by all the Scottish universities and colleges, and we're responsible for collaborative framework agreements, which we advertise to the sector to try and make procurement more efficient, to get leverage with our market and increase our buying power within the market. So at APUC, I manage the information services category, but we also have an estates and buildings category, laboratories category, and professional services and HR category. We also have procurement shared service staff within each institution, well, within many institutions within Scotland, and it's a service that they can call on to try and have a flexible approach to the staff numbers within their procurement teams. We also roll out e-procurement solutions for the sector and have a responsible procurement and development team. So we'll be responsible for promoting best practices, not only for sustainability, but for procurement on the whole. Okay, so if we now go on to the project that I'm going to concentrate on today, the project is for the supply and installation commissioning of audiovisual equipment. So audiovisual equipment has become really important within universities and colleges because it really allows collaborative working, and most of the courses and the syllabus are now aligned to collaborative working. And what we also see is digital signage around campuses and lecture theatres with high-tech audio equipment and software to relay their lectures to remote locations. So this contract focuses on that kind of product, And we created 2 product lots, one just for the supply of the goods, and which is less used, and another lot for the design, supply, installation, and project management of large AV projects. And that's the most important lot, actually. So we see the contractors as very important to the Scottish economy because the contractors are small installers, and they really rely on this contract to be able to continue their business. And what we wanted to do was embed sustainability into our approach, promoting energy efficiency, energy efficient installations and equipment. We were going to try and create employment opportunities, so apprenticeships, training opportunities for staff and students. And we were also hoping to address circularity, try where we could encourage reuse of products. One thing I really wanted to focus on, just as a tester really for our large ICT hardware agreement, which is forthcoming. It's managed by Scottish Procurement. I wanted to test out some award criteria for supply chain transparency. So that was the focus of our tender. And the way that we did that was, first of all, we took a whole life costing approach. So instead of just considering the item cost, we considered the item cost of installations, but also the energy rating of that product. And what we did was we asked tenderers to bid with 5-year solutions. So we measured I worked with my colleague in the estates and buildings category, and we established the average unit cost for electricity. We made some assumptions around the usage per day, and we measured the power consumption over 5 years based on the lowest power option within each item that was tendered. So each item within a specification. And we asked for large scale installations that could be easily introduced by institutions when they're considering their AV options. And to try and encourage some circularity, we also asked for a rebate for the return of the equipment after 5 years, and we had a separate question on how that might be reused within the tender. Also considered in the 5-year cost was warranty costs and replacement bulbs, for example, for projectors. So that was all be included in 5-year costs. So one area that, as I mentioned, I really wanted to focus on was supply chain mapping. So we asked the tenderers to complete a matrix on supply chain mapping. So we asked them to complete a matrix from the country of origin and the tier 1 supplier right the way down to tier 4. I mentioned earlier on that the suppliers were local installers, so I really wasn't expecting very much from this process, but we awarded points for those that could demonstrate knowledge of the supply chain. And while I don't think we received perfect responses, I do think that the award criteria raised awareness of issues of the need to know your supply chain with the suppliers, and some of them demonstrated probably a better response than we expected. So we probably had 30 or 40 pieces of equipment that we asked them to go and find out a bit more about the supply chain, or challenge them on their knowledge of supply chain. And some of them even broke down certain items into component level, which was quite interesting. So I'm probably going to concentrate more now. So that was some of the tools that we used during the award criteria, but I've been asked to focus on contract management for this. So what I'll maybe do is just introduce you to our way at APUC of carrying out contract management. So what we do is we categorize all our contracts. We have 181 contracts that we work and advertise to the higher education and further education sector in Scotland. And we categorize our contracts by strategic, managed or routine. And we heavily manage our strategic contracts. And the way we do that is we consider value of the contract per year and risk. But while we consider risk, we embed sustainability into that risk as well. So we would consider this on the right hand side of the slide there. You can see some of the items that we would consider when we're reviewing risk. And this project here is a strategic project due to high spend. So the spend increases every year, except for this year actually because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the spend increases every year for this project, and it's also we also think there's opportunities within the supply chain to address sustainability and risk during the process. So when we have when we have designated our supplier strategic, we would have 6 monthly review meetings. We would use balanced scorecard where we send a scorecard to our individual institutions and we ask them to complete feedback, and then we relay the scores to the suppliers at our 6 monthly review meetings. We also set key performance indicators and discuss these during our review meetings, and we collect management information on spend. And recently we've developed a tool called Sustain, which we'll ask the suppliers to complete. I'll just discuss Sustain slightly later on. Now the KPIs, the key performance indicators that we use for this particular project were two broad sustainability KPIs. One was covering many items, so green products, reusable products, whether they would register for Sustain or our supply chain evaluation system, and the understanding of the supply chain. And the object behind this is that we send the KPIs to the suppliers before the meeting and they do a self-completion. And then we discuss at the meeting why they've provided a score, a certain score against that, and where we can maybe improve in the future. And the other sustainability KPI that we introduced was community benefits achieved. So what employment opportunities did they create? What advantages can they provide to the HE and FE sector, the staff in terms of training, and how can we develop communities of practice? So those are the two KPIs that we discussed at the contract management meeting. So we had just before the pandemic, we had our first round of review meetings at the end of the year, and it was really encouraging actually. We had, especially in community benefits, we had 4 suppliers that had created apprenticeships in engineering for just as a result of this framework agreement. Some suppliers had offered work placements for our students. We also had one supplier that had taken on a new member of staff specifically to service this contract, which was really pleasing. And we also have many suppliers offering work experience and upskilling for our own internal staff within the institutions, and also students that would be interested in taking part in that. So again, really interesting, tangible employment opportunities and training opportunities developed from the framework agreement. So we were pleased about that. We also had some suppliers who were looking actively then to take back some of the redundant equipment, and they were looking to repurpose the equipment so that they could forward the equipment to a nominated charity or another institution within the sector that may have use for it. So that was also interesting. So they were the benefits we could map after year one. Instead of looking at the supply chain mapping process and trying to develop that, what we did was we've asked the suppliers to complete our new supply chain evaluation tool, which I mentioned earlier. It's called Sustain. So what we do is we get suppliers to log into an online portal where we ask 40 questions, and it's about their practices within the supply chain around due diligence, HR, how they have contracts, how they contract their own staff, and how they expect the supply chain to contract to have HR contracts and practices with their staff, for example. And it's aimed at improving working conditions in the supply chain and highlighting any weaknesses. And if there are weaknesses, then we would look to try and move down the tiers and ask tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers to complete the evaluation tool as well. So the tool's just been launched, and we're doing a pilot phase at the moment, and we're hoping that we can get 100 suppliers logged in and completed by the end of next year. So that process is ongoing. Once we feel that once we've and that's not just electronic suppliers, that's suppliers across all the categories, but we feel that once we get 100 suppliers on it, we might be able to either fine tune the tool, or we can allow our own stakeholders to start using it and try and cover their supply chains as well. So the universities within Scotland hopefully will get to use that tool as well. So unfortunately, halfway through the second year of the contract, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and it really affected everything to do with this particular framework agreement, because, well, it's got an element of physical delivery. So what we found was that when the universities had to close their doors to students and staff, the projects all stopped. Luckily, in the UK and many other countries, there are help to work schemes, and many of the staff involved in the delivery of this contract were furloughed. We took advantage of the furlough scheme, where the government paid 80% of the wages, and the companies only needed to pay 20%. So we found that the service levels were really diminished. We were starting to look at suppliers just to make sure that they're financially sound. So the focus from delivering sustainability benefits, it really shifted towards to focusing on survival and what impact will this have in the service, and what's the future? What does the future of the framework and the service look like? And we tried to help the suppliers by finding additional demand. So when the academics and the staff from the universities and colleges began to work from home, they maybe needed some audiovisual equipment, and we tried to connect suppliers with institutions that were looking for that equipment. So lessons learned in the project, we did feel that we learned lessons that we could take forward to our ICT hardware tender, which is tendered by the Scottish Government Procurement. But we feed into that tender, and the lessons learned, I would say, we thought that we could use the supply chain mapping as award criteria, but we decided to change that approach, and we made it a mandatory contract condition. So after 30 days of award, the supplier, the successful contractor on our ICT hardware contract, would have to provide as a mandatory contract condition the supply chain disclosure. Also, the whole life costing approach, I feel that it worked very well. But we did receive a high number of supplier clarifications, particularly from one supplier actually, but we received a high number of clarifications. And it is a complex way to do things, but I think it encourages many good aspects in energy efficiency. You can price for circularity. So all these points act as incentives to embed sustainability. But it was a complex evaluation, and it probably added on some time to our project. Also, we changed our award criteria slightly, where we focused on processes for supply chain transparency when we went out to tender for our ICT hardware agreement. So our focus was on procedures and robust procedures in place, and actually we wanted that to go right down to mining within that tender. So it's a slightly different market where we were dealing specifically with brands and not small installers. So we did change the award criteria slightly by making supply chain mapping a mandatory outcome, and then focusing on procedures for a robust supply chain within the award criteria. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this interesting presentation. And yeah, as you said, the floor is open now for questions. So feel free to either press the raise your hand button or to type in your question in the question section below, and I will read it out loud then. I'll give you just a minute.
I think Kathleen has a question.
I can't, yeah, sorry, I can't find the hand button, so I did it physically.
Okay, yeah, you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, that's
Great, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you, Michael, for a very interesting presentation. I had a question about how you're organized when it comes to the contract management. Is it like a separate
Are we still there?
team? Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Michael? It seems like he lost connection. Hello, Michael? Maybe you have to save your question for later.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Yeah, it feels like, but now you're muted, Michael. Maybe you can try to unmute yourself again. Maybe that works then. No, seems like it doesn't work right now. Okay, well then you have to save your questions for later. And I would say we can just, I can just hand over to you, Kathleen, and then you can share your experiences so far. Okay, I will make you a presenter.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
There and back. And it should be in full presentation mode right now.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to present our case study. My name is Kathleen Mukahi, and I work at the Sustainability Department at Region Stockholm. And we assist the Procurement Department both with criteria and the monitoring and the contract management phase, particularly when it comes to sustainability. So we have a little team, and I work specifically with social criteria, and I have colleagues who work with environmental criteria. And just to put this in a setting, Region Stockholm is not the city of Stockholm, it's the region consisting of 26 municipalities. And what we provide for all the citizens of the region is healthcare, public transport, and regional planning. So the procurements are related with those areas. We cooperate with all the regions in the country. You have a little map here of Sweden to your right, and we have a small office that helps the coordination. And the idea here is that many of us, since we have the same services to our citizens, that means we end up having many of the same suppliers. So they've identified high-risk product areas. Most of these are actually related to more the healthcare sector. So there's more than this, but these are the ones we cooperate around. And every region has extra responsibility for a high-risk area. So if you look at C, I think this should work, yes. That's us, that's the region Stockholm, and we have extra responsibility for ICT. And what extra responsibility means is that we do a risk analysis when it comes to specifically to social conditions in the supply chain. So Michael was talking about like local community benefits. This one is really focused on human rights and worker rights and corruption in the supply chain. So risk analysis, and then as well with contract management, that will focus on the ICT sector, and then we share the results of our audits with all the regions. And for example, if you have the region A, which is up north, they have extra responsible for surgical instruments. They'll focus on those kinds of suppliers, and they'll share the results with us. That way, we're not all running up, knocking doors on the same suppliers, doing the same kind of audits. It's a more efficient way of working. All the regions share the same code of conduct. It's based on global compacts, so human rights, labor rights, environment, and anti-corruption. And now we've actually even harmonized our contract terms. And the contract terms when it comes to supply chains basically say two things. The contract shall be performed with respect of all of these conventions that you have to your left. But of course, as we know, unfortunately, especially in the ICT sector or high-risk sectors, we can't ask for a guarantee that products will be produced with a guarantee that all human rights are respected, because that's not what supply chains look like today. So what we're looking for, and when we do audits, is we look at what's in this little pink or whatever that color is box. We're looking at routines, processes, due diligence, so that they have policy commitments, that they're communicating the policy down the supply chain, that they have responsibility within their own organization, that they're aware of the risks in the supply chain, that they monitor compliance in the supply chain, and that they have routines when they find non-compliances. So we say respect human rights, but since it's so complex and very long supply chains, what we're looking for is these routines when we then do the audits. So we have the code of conduct. We do risk assessments of these areas. We have contract terms, and then I'll get into contract management a bit more what that means. Corrective actions is also something that we, in general, do especially for supply chains. On the environment, sometimes we can take out a fine if they don't comply to environmental, but for supply chains, we try to make things better and demand that our suppliers work to improve the conditions in the supply chain. So I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about ICT and this case study. We started the process of 8 procurements with lots of market engagement, because this was the first time that we were going to have very extensive social criteria, and we wanted to make sure that the market was ready. So we had one big hearing where we invited both resellers and brands, where we said what our intentions were. Then since they're competing, they weren't saying very much back to us. So then we had separate meetings, offered separate meetings for those who wanted. Then we actually circulated a draft version of the criteria we were thinking of posing in the procurement, and those who wanted could send in their written comments. And then we did the procurements, and at the end we had another roundtable discussion with the market to collect their feedback afterwards. This picture is just to show that we used a bit different tools during the tender process. The contract terms that I showed are necessary and good to have. The problem is it's only when you follow up and during the contract management phase that you discover whether your suppliers actually have these things in place or not. At that time, you have a contract with them, and it's a much more complex process to work with them for improvements than if you can eliminate unserious actors from the start. It's also a competition issue, I find. So sometimes we've had qualification requirements. So already at the tender stage, we've asked for verification that certain processes and routines are in place, like a bare minimum. So we don't get in suppliers that, well, basically cheating their way in, if you know what I mean. They'll sign the contract, they'll say, yes, we live up to this. And then when you do the follow-up, you realize, no, they're not. So it's nice to eliminate these from the start when possible. And another thing, as Mike was talking about, was the award criteria. And this we use as well to try to promote and give an advantage to basically to suppliers that actually put effort and resources into these issues. It costs them too to work with this in a serious way. And we were putting 30% of the value on quality, and quality in the PC, for example, procurement was environment and social criteria. The kind of award criteria that we've had during these 8 procurements were things like systematic monitoring and deviation from the brand owners. We also did something similar to what Michael's talking about with transparency, getting them to give the names of factories, how they work with risk assessments. We were also interested in trying to get transparency when it comes to what process chemicals were being used at the final assembly. Also, we wanted to try to address the issue of worker empowerment, because a majority of the final assembly occurs in China, where there is no freedom of assembly. So we were trying to give extra points to any brand owners that were making proactive efforts in this field. And then as well, we have policies and due diligence on conflict minerals and cobalt that we've sometimes had as award criteria, and sometimes we've had them as mandatory, depending on the object of procurement. Excuse me. Okay, contract management. What we look for, as I said, was processes and routines. We also use a product to verify, so that we're not just looking at routines. How do they apply this on a specific product that's the object of procurement? And the final step, on-site revision, is very resource intensive and not something we can do particularly often, once every year or every 2 years, basically. So it's very limited, the possibility to do this kind of on-site audit. So when we do audits of our suppliers, they're often resellers. And what we look at is, first we send them a self-assessment questionnaire, a bit like what Michael was talking about as well. And then we'll send an auditor that will sit with them during an entire day and look at how they work in practice and write a report. And then we work with them afterwards if there's non-conformances to get them to improve their policies and procedures. As I was saying, we do have the possibility to do factory audits, though not often enough. We are members of Electronics Watch. This is also a way to get information about what's going on in particular factories, to keep us both in general, what risks are present, even if it's factories we don't have, and then information about specific factories. Another tool that we can use if we don't have, because even an audit with an auditor takes resources. Sometimes we've put in the contract reporting requirements. So we can say, well, in this procurement, we know that there's particular risks when it comes to overtime, or particular risks when it comes to living wage or chemicals or conflict minerals or what it may be. So we can put in an obligation on the supplier that gets awarded the contract to have to report to us proactively within 6 months of starting the contract, and tell us with a report how they address these specific risks. And then we can have a meeting with them and a dialogue and look into that. It still takes resources, because you have to deal with the information, the reports you get in, but money-wise, not as expensive as hiring an auditor, if you will. And this is just to show what a corrective action plan may look like. So it's in Swedish as well. So you'll have, what is it that's in the contract that they should be respecting? And then what is the non-compliance, and what should they do, and a time plan, and our comments to it. And this is what we use as a working document then with our suppliers. The next picture is something I think is just really important to keep in mind, is that, I don't know if people have seen this report. It was actually published last March, but this kind of report from civil society, from organizations, or sometimes it's just a media report, comes up regularly. And often these are issues that might not even have come up on the radar previously. You might have done an audit. You might have read an audit that someone else has written, a third-part audit, and these issues don't come up. And then the NGOs publish this report, and you're like, wow, this is a huge risk. These are our suppliers. And then it's really important, I find, to also be able to be reactive and to be able to enter a dialogue with your suppliers, send a letter, ask them formally, what are they doing to address this risk? Can they confirm, whether or not this occurs in our supply chain? So this is also important to keep in mind, is that even if you have these processes and routines and you send the self-assessment questionnaire, I think it's good to have resources set aside to be able to be reactive when issues like this arise. So finally, I think it's important in procurements in general, high risk, and ICT is high risk, for a public authority to know their risks. I mean, to know the risks in the sector. It's hard to keep our suppliers accountable if we don't even know if they're hitting the target. If they're identifying the risk, we also have to know what the risks are. It's very important to have something binding. I know that many organizations, even within our region, can sometimes send a code of conduct, as an attachment to the contract. I don't find that satisfactory because it's very difficult and it's not necessarily binding. So make sure you have binding contractual terms so you can do contract management afterwards. And I think there are advantages to have some kind of verification at the time of bidding to be able to eliminate at least suppliers that don't even have these issues on their radar, don't work with them at all. And then to monitor the supply chain through dialogue, audits, monitoring. It can be a variety of tools, but monitoring and contract management is really important because the risk is otherwise that you put binding contractual terms, but then if you never follow up and you never audit and you never verify, then your suppliers know this. So they'll also be more inclined to sign on and relax because they know you'll never check up on it. So if you put it in, follow up that they're actually living up to what they've engaged to do. That was it. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm glad to take questions.
Great, thank you so much, Kathleen. That was really interesting. And yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now. I also see that Michael is back online. Is that right, Michael? Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I'm back online. Sorry about that. I lost connection just at the right time for questions as well.
Yeah, we noticed that. Well, even better that you're now back online. Perfect. So you can ask questions to Michael and to Kathleen now. And I also see that there is already someone who raised their hand. And I think it was a question for you, Michael. Actually, I think they changed their mind again. Okay, but I still see a question. Okay. So it's quite a long question. I will read it first. Okay, it's for Kathleen. And it's from David. Hello, good that you're here with us. So for the additional qualification criteria, we are bound by the European Single Procurement Document, which limits our ability to insert additional criteria not already present in the template. Could you perhaps advise how you factored in your criteria at the qualification stage?
What we did was we formulated it, I don't know if this will answer the question, because everything that's at the qualification stage is about the supplier being able to live up to the contract. So that's also the stage where you verify that they have capacity, that they pay their taxes, that they haven't been convicted for corruption. And so we thought, okay, if they're going to be able to live up to everything that's in the contract, then they should at least, even at the bidding stage, have some kind of policy for human rights and to respect ILO core convention. So we took like a light version of what is then in the contract. And the argument was, there's no way they're going to be able to live up to everything that's in the contract if they don't even have this policy in place if they don't even have an idea of the risks. So we did like a light version, if you will, at least at policy level, and then maybe 2 or 3 routines that we asked for them to send in. Does that answer the question?
I hope it does. If not, you can just feel free to keep asking, and I will follow up on that. But so far, I think it sounds good. Yeah, I think we can keep going. There are some more questions for you, Kathleen. And you can just tell me when you need a break. So the second question is from Mark. So he's asking, can you explain how much work it can be to follow up? And what are you doing if results after 2 years don't improve, but your contract is running, for example, for 5 years?
I'm in the advantageous position not to have to count my hours and contribute them to like different areas of work. So I can't really answer that question specifically. What I can say is that what takes time, even if we've developed together in the cooperation with the other regions routines. So the self-assessment questionnaire it's already what's it called? There's a template. There's a template for how audit reports should look that we can give to the auditors. The auditor's work takes about 1 full day there, and a few hours before and a few hours after. It costs us about 50,000 crowns. It's about 5,000 euros, I think, for 1 report. That's money-wise. What takes time from me is afterwards. So many of our suppliers have non-compliances. They won't have done a proper risk analysis, or they only will have, evaluated their first-tier supplier and not have done any risk analysis of the rest of the supply chain. And sometimes they don't even understand the extent of our demands. And so it's working with them that takes a lot of hours of work. And there was a part B to that question. Wasn't there? It was both resources, but then.
Yes, I have to scroll up again. It is, yeah, the work, and then what do you do if results don't improve? Yeah.
Right. So we have terminated a contract because basically it was a supplier who, there were no improvements. They were hardly answering our letters. So at the end, and then we had our lawyers involved that gave them a final warning, within 30 days, and then we terminated the contract. So it's always good to have that as an option, but it doesn't happen very often. And as long as things are moving, then we feel that it's better to work for improvements. So there is the possibility to terminate. There's also something to be said about if you've identified that, wow, in this particular sector, you can make it harder in the next procurement as well. So that's not a contract management phase, but I know that, for example, if certain risks that our suppliers haven't been working with at all, because we've been following up and we realize they're really bad at this, but there are some that are good at it, then in the next procurement, maybe we say, well, this is a mandatory requirement that has to be verified at the time of bidding. And then right there, you've eliminated all the ones that haven't done their homework.
Okay, well, it's good to hear that it doesn't happen so often, that you actually have to take serious next steps.
Well, it's good and it's bad. The problem it's not because, it's more because in a way I'd like to have more options. I'd like to be able to take fines, for example. Because sometimes if you say that it's going on for like a year and it's because they're working hard at it the entire time, that's one thing. But sometimes it's just that you don't know internally whether they're just dragging you on. And I'm just being candid here. As a public buyer, what we have is working for improvements, and then we have terminating the contract. And terminating the contract is a legal process that can be challenged. It's also as well, if you terminate a contract with one supplier, well then what's the guarantee that the other supplier that you're going to be buying from instead has anything better in place? So there's a challenge there. So I think that we don't work with fines yet. I think that could be an option, at least when it comes to them answering and coming in with documentation and implementing routines on time in a more timely manner. So I don't think we're done yet with that, with developing those routines.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. Okay, I think I give you a break, Kathleen, for now. There are some more questions for you, but I will hand over to Michael. And there's a question for you. So it's from Aline. I see that one of our speakers from our first session is here. And yeah, she says, first, thank you for both of you for really interesting presentations. So I can tell you that for now. And then also the question, you said you changed from using transparency of the supply chain as award criteria to demand. How far down in the supply chain does the tenderer have to answer for?
Yeah, so when we created our award criteria matrix, we just left columns for tier 4, but in our contract condition, we've asked to the smelters and if possible beyond. So we've asked for the supply chain down to the smelters. We actually haven't been completely happy with what we've received so far. So that's something that's we're still trying to establish a baseline that we'll be happy with, that we can then work on through contract management. And I think transparency seems to be very difficult to achieve through tender processes. The problem we've got is always with public procurement is relating to the subject matter of the contract. So the particular device that we're buying through the contract and trying to get the supply chain related to that device. So it's not, each approach has had separate challenges, I would say, but in the project that I was presenting, we were targeting a different market with smaller installers, whereas in the Scottish government-led procurement for our IT hardware, contract values are over £100 million, and it's 100 million euros, and it's a contract direct with brands. So the opportunities are slightly different there, but there's still I don't think we've been completely successful so far, but we'll continue to try and do that through contract, try and improve on it through contract management.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's another question probably in the similar direction. You mentioned the requirement for tenderers to complete a matrix for supply chain mapping down to tier 4. Did you have many suppliers who were able to provide this data?
Well, I showed one in the presentation. So we probably had, the contract's got 8 suppliers on one of the product lots, and we probably had 4 good responses and 4 terrible responses, well, not so good responses. So the scores varied. The scores varied greatly. But again, it's the nature of the market that is very new to them, because they're installers, and they source from a reseller, and sometimes the reseller was the same for each of the suppliers, and that's tended to make the difference if the reseller actually knew their own market themselves, and then they were able to provide the information. So that's really where the scores were different.
Okay, maybe one last question for you. Kathleen, you had a question, right? I just remember that it was your turn actually.
I've got one for Kathleen.
Okay, just stay online. My question was, when you do contract management, whether it's a separate team that follows up the issues pertaining to sustainability. Because at our place, we have like the contract manager that follows up issues of quality and delivering on time and etc. And then we do specifically the audits related to sustainability issues. That's how we're organized. But I was wondering how you have it internally.
So I think that's a really great question, and it's something that we considered when we were structuring our contract management. Do we have a separate team for contract management and tendering? We've kept it all within one team, so our category team manages our own contracts. And the reason we decided to do that was because when you put so much work up front into the tender to try and create the demand with the stakeholders, the universities, and then the key performance indicators themselves are quite well known by the framework manager. So the framework manager then is responsible for pulling together all the contract management of that framework. What we do have though is a head of responsible procurement, and she would be drafted in to help with the sustainability aspects. And when we've got sustainability goals within our contract management, we log them on. We've got a responsible procurement action plan. So we'll try to define our procurement goals within each contract on our action plan, and that's monitored by the head of responsible procurement and her team. So in general, we manage the contracts and the frameworks together, but we also have additional support for responsible procurement. I know of some institutions that their preference is to have separate teams for contract management and tendering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we have another question for Kathleen. Kathleen, what is your experience from the roundtable discussion after procurement? What did the tenderers say about your criteria and demands on socially responsible public procurement?
Thank you. In general, one thing they said was that they appreciate having tough criteria, and even the resellers. And the resellers said that they they enjoyed having to ask tough questions to the brands, but also to be able to say, we need this information in order to be able to sell your products, in order to win this procurement. So there was like a competitive advantage that they could be using in their dialogues with the brands. So I thought that was interesting. Then they had opinions about the transparency criteria, which was that it is a lot of work, and they would rather see this as a mandatory criteria in the contract for the one that gets awarded the contract that becomes a supplier, because they said that it's a lot of work, and you might do all of this and not even end up getting the contract. And they were also questioning. They said that the supply chains for IT are quite dynamic, and what they meant was that even if we fill in this template where we say the name of the factory and even factories for components down the supply chain, that's the information we have right now when we're filling in the tender. But if we get the contract in 6 months, that might have changed, and it can change during a contract period. I also thought that was interesting to know that it is dynamic. It's not like they have like a supply chain and that's what it is for 4 years. Let me see if there was other things that we got quite good. It was an entire afternoon, and I think that at that time as well, they were more open because it was over, if you will. They also talked about, when it comes to conflict minerals, we talked about the transparency and what Michael was just talking about how difficult it is to get beyond the smelters, and that the information that they get is limited, and also not in time. So if you're procuring a specific product, what they might know about the smelters is there's a lapse of time, so that basically a lack of traceability beyond smelters when it comes to minerals. Those, on the top of my head, those were some of the main feedbacks we got.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, another question for you, Kathleen. How will you monitor the fulfillment of the contract regarding the social clauses?
So I don't know if this is, I think that I addressed some of that during the presentation, but I mean, I can just elaborate just a little bit, because the challenge that we have is that, of course, we'll have a few resellers that are on many contracts, and once you've done the office audit with them, there's no need to like do another audit again. I think you could say that an audit is good for 2-3 years. So at that point, we can choose smaller contracts or new suppliers to us, or engage much more reactively. So when issues come up, when Electronic Watch publishes a report or another organization publishes a report, get into dialogue at that point when things come up in a less formalized way than an actual audit. I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think also that was mentioned in the presentation already. We also put the presentations on our website afterwards, so you can also look into them again. I don't know, Michael, you also had a question for Kathleen. You mentioned, right?
Yeah. I thought your presentation was really interesting, Kathleen. Was just one point you mentioned that actually that it cost, was it 5,000 crowns for an audit?
No,
Is that
50,000 crowns. So I think that's 5,000 euros.
5,000 euros for an audit. Do you have an audit function within Region Stockholm Council, or is that outsourced?
That's a separate contract. So we have a list of consultancy firms that we can
do supply chain use for supply chain audit.
We tender actually, that are specialized. So the environmental team has ones that are specialized in environment, and then we have another list of auditors that are specialized in supply chain.
Do you supplement your electronics watch monitoring with these kind of audits then as well?
No, I mean, so far we've used the electronics watch as a more of the reactive. Yeah, and I mean, because again, if we have resellers, we have we have a few contracts with brands, but otherwise it's very much resellers on the ICT. And an electronics watch report will be about conditions in a factory, and the audits, there's like a bit of a mismatch there, because the audits will be, how does the reseller work with its supply chains and their routines? So it's a desktop, or it's so we can lift certain risks, like, for example, did you know about this risk, or have you heard about this factory during an audit, during that conversation? But that's more to measure how their routines in general. Then if there's a specific concern at a specific factory, then it's more of a matter of a dialogue. When we've established that factory, yes, are producing hardware that is being supplied to us, then we enter a specific conversation about that report.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are no more questions so far. If you still have a question to one of the speakers, feel free to type in your question. We would still have a few more minutes to go. But I think there were quite interesting questions already so far. So yeah, if there are no more questions, we can also end here already. I would like to thank, there's another, no, not a question, but congratulations to the speakers. And thank you again. So I can follow that. I just wanted to thank both of you for your time. I know it's a quite busy time right now, and yeah, thank you that you're both here to share your experience. I think they were both really interesting presentations, and yeah, I would also like to thank the audience, of course, for attending and for your questions. It was a really interesting discussion and question round with you. And as I said before, all case studies, also the ones from the first session, are all published now. So you can look into our resource center on the sustainable procurement platform. It is in the chat, the link, and you can also, of course, see the presentations and the recording on the Procura Plus website. So yeah, if you have no more questions, I would say thank you for that webinar, and yeah, happy holidays for all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks a lot from me.
Thank you. Yeah, Paula.